Did y'all hear my idea about the breakfast food truck with the live chicken coop in the back? I'm just kidding. All y'all doing. I don't know if you noticed, but in Cottington County, it is spring cleaning time. I know what you're thinking. You're going to go out there and get all those goodies, but they're mine.
It's hard to believe what this South Dakota man is accused of doing to his own mom. Well, let's just say it's enough to possibly make you lose your appetite. But was this out of the blue and random, or did a violent history leave the writing on the wall? Thanks for joining us on Law and Crime. I'm Elizabeth Millner. Now, the beheading stories are always a lot, and we see shocking cases every day. To think about killing someone is already horrible, right? But to take it a step further and cut up a person, let alone your 70-year-old mom, well, that's what one South Dakota man is accused of doing just last week.
Huh? What's that? You need gas? I'm cold. Get lost.
So this is 36-year-old Bowen Fladland.
I've been finding a whole lot of shit. Today I got boy a rat rod. It came at a mechanic's special discount. I also noticed that it was homeboy and he's gone for a year and a half, so I'm going to make sure it runs when he gets back. And of course I'm talking about his 80s Huffy's motorized bike. It's like an old Schwinn bike, but it's got a motor on it. Somebody call a doctor.
And while he cracks a few jokes here and there on social media, what he's accused of doing to his mom Marlene isn't funny at all. But let's just take a step back real quick, because Bowen reportedly has a pretty long arrest history, including an assault on his mom back in 2023. According to a report by KELO, in that incident, Bowen allegedly grabbed his mom Marlene by the throat and pushed her. She told authorities then she became lightheaded after this altercation. Then the next day, Bowen allegedly grabbed her by the throat again and pushed her against a refrigerator, where he allegedly grabbed her by the neck again and began to squeeze her throat. Now, the report says that Marlene was able to escape and hide, but while she was hiding out, she heard her son digging through a drawer in the kitchen, the silverware drawer no less. As she came out of hiding, her son was holding 2 butter knives, and he was threatening to kill her. Now, you might be thinking, shouldn't that have landed him in some sort of trouble? Well, it did. Kind of. In the 2023 case, he was convicted of aggravated assault, and he got a sentence of 10 years. Well, a suspended sentence, that is. So the conviction didn't land him in prison. But about 2 years later, on July 8th of this year, police got another call. When they arrived to Marlene and Bowen's home, it was a terrifying discovery. Marlene was dead in the front of the yard of her home. So much is still unclear, but this is what we've learned so far. A family member told police they spoke with Marlene that Saturday before, and Marlene told that relative Bowen was assaulting her. So police tracked him down, and when they caught up to him, he revealed a whole lot more, like that he kneeled on his mom's neck until she died. Then he reportedly used some type of tool to remove her head from her body. Officials confirmed Marlene was decapitated. The South Dakota Attorney General saying, "We are in the process of gathering evidence, items of evidentiary value. There will be an autopsy. This was a beheading case." Now Bowen faces 2 criminal charges. Count 1, murder in the first degree. Count 2, murder in the second degree. He remains in jail on a $500,000 cash-only bond. So what prompted this? I wonder will we learn more about this at the upcoming hearing. But let's break this down with what we know so far with criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor Julie Rendelman. Julie, always so great to see you. You know, in a case like this, I got to ask kind of about the bond amount, it being $500,000. But I'm curious to know, like, why is there even a bond amount in this case? It's a cash bond, again, for $500,000. But with the criminal history, especially history of violence against his mom, he's now accused of killing, why do you think that they just didn't go for no bond in this case?
I don't know. If this was in New York, this would be remand. Particularly, as you know, besides the fact that this is a homicide, there are prior domestic violence, really serious domestic violence incidents in which he was the perpetrator. Now, one would assume that the prosecution and maybe the judge themselves knows that he can't make the cash bail, so therefore they don't think that there's an issue. But quite frankly, I'm shocked that this isn't a remand because I think it is a remand appropriate type of case.
This is a Law and Crime legal alert. If you've received Depo-Provera birth control shots and were later diagnosed with a brain or spinal tumor called meningioma, you may be eligible for a lawsuit. Morgan & Morgan is investigating claims that patients weren't properly warned about this risk. It's free to check, takes just a few minutes, and you don't pay unless you win. So scan the QR code on your screen, click the link below, or go to forthepeople.com/LCDepo to see if you qualify. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised too. Anytime we see a number on it, whether it's a million, half a million, 25,000, it still feels like a lot of amount of money, or I should say a little amount of money for even just such a horrendous and horrible case like this one. And I got to ask Julie, what do you make of this case overall? First, you have the murder of Marlene. Her son told police that he knelt on his mom's neck until she died, then used a tool to remove her head from her body.
I mean, we speak about cases all the time, Elizabeth, and I think at this point one would think that nothing shocks the senses, but it always does. And I think what stands out in this case is kind of what we talked about just a moment ago, is that this isn't the first time that he had been incredibly violent. I think it was in 2023 he had pled no contest to physically abusing his mother. I believe he took out 2 knives. She had to flee from him. There's evidence that appears that before he killed her here, she had spoken to a family member and indicated he had assaulted her. I do start to wonder, and I'm sure this will be something that we'll learn about soon, whether or not this is a case that involves some type of mental health issues, perhaps some type of drug issues. But it's just horrifying to think about what she went through moments before she died.
Yeah, and she was a woman in her 70s. And I think at the offense that happened in 2023, maybe in her late 60s, but still just thinking about her age, thinking about what she went through, it's just horrible. And according to reports, the two of them did live together. But going back to the previous allegations against him of grabbing her neck and having the knives out when she went to go hide, but he only got a suspended sentence of 10 years. Kind of what's the point of a suspended 10-year sentence?
It's a good question with not an easy answer. And I will say this, and this is a very unfortunate part of cases like this. Keep in mind the victim is his mother. The victim does not want to see him go to jail. The victim potentially, it wasn't cooperative. She may have come forward initially. I'm talking about the 2023 events. She may have come forward initially and then said, it's my son, he's been punished enough. And so unfortunately, when we have this dynamic, it makes it much more difficult for prosecution, for law enforcement to do what potentially they need to do to make sure something like this doesn't happen.
And do you think it's possible that maybe he was living in the home? Because I'm curious, with this history that he has against his mother, why he was still continuing to live with her. And so do you think it's possible that maybe he was just the caregiver in that relationship, trying to care for his mom, but still had these acts of violence against her? What are your thoughts on just the dynamic, especially since the two had lived together?
So, and again, we don't have these answers. It's funny that you thought of that because I think of it the other way around. I think potentially she was his caregiver. Again, I'm going to guess that this is not a defendant that's coming into this. Well, we know he's certainly not someone who's coming into this not having some prior record. We don't know fully, at least I don't know, whether or not there are multiple other types of violent crime in his history. We don't, again, know his mental status. But my guess, and again, we'll see which one of us is correct, is that potentially he was living there because she allowed it. Was he working? Was he living off of her? A lot of times you see these men, sometimes women who've never worked, they're single, no children, they end up living with their parents. Sometimes they have some mental health issues. And in this case, unfortunately, this was violence that seemed to spiral over the years and eventually ended in her death.
And it's just kind of horrible just to think about, just killing one thing, terrible too, but just the added extra layer of taking off her head just for whatever reason it was. It's horrible altogether. And as a criminal defense attorney, say Bowen is your client. He already confessed to police, but where do you go from here, especially if he wanted to possibly take this case to trial?
So we go back to, well, what is the mitigation? And you're right. The question becomes, it's obviously there's nothing worse than killing someone, let alone killing your mother and then beheading her. The question is, well, why did he behead her? Did he think that somehow that would help him in terms of getting away with the crime? Was it some added brutality that he wanted to do to her? Was he so angry that after killing her, he thought that that was something that would, in a sense, satiate him? And so I think the role of a criminal defense attorney is at this point is to figure out who this defendant is, mental health, drugs, alcohol, any type of potential domestic violence against him as a child growing up, anything that would potentially explain why these events happen. And then the next question is this someone who's going to take a plea? Is this someone who's going to mount some type of mental disease or defect defense? Again, I always use time will tell. We don't know, but I assume that his defense attorneys are going to explore every angle.
And let's go to the other side of kind of the table in the courthouse, and that being the prosecution table. And you're a former prosecutor, and we all know that no case is necessarily a slam dunk. But do you think with what we know now that there is kind of a lot working in the prosecution's favor?
I do. And you are right. You never know what a jury of 12 is going to do, but sometimes you have a little bit of an inkling. And here you have a case where potentially the prosecution not only can bring in this case, his confession on this case, but they may be able to actually bring in the old case from 2023. Because there was a domestic violence, they may be able to establish something within that opens the door to it being relevant to this case. And so you also have to think about, well, who had access to his mother? There were only two of them living there. He admits to killing her. And so it's going to be hard pressed to assume someone else did it that we don't know about. Again, anything's possible, but I think the uphill battle in this case is more for the defense than it is for the prosecution.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I feel like they don't have a lot working for them in the defensive side necessarily. So we'll kind of see what ends up happening. But I'm curious to know, prosecutors, they don't have to prove motive in cases. But if this case were to get in front of a jury, do you think jurors want to hear the why? Is that very important to jurors to hear? Why did this happen? Why did he do this to her, allegedly?
It's funny, we think about the Brian Koberger case because he pled guilty, and the big question that everyone wants the answer to, which often we never get, is the why. I think a jury naturally wants to hear there's a motive, but I don't think they need it. It can assist them in being able to establish that this is the person who committed the crime because this is the person who had the reason to, but I don't think they need it. And in a case like this, they may be asking the why, but I don't think that's going to prevent them from checking off guilty.
Yeah, and the why can always get us kind of caught up too, because if we, focus on the why, we forget like, okay, but this person actually did what they were accused of doing, again, allegedly, because we're still, he's presumed innocent until proven guilty. But I'm curious also, Julie, when we see cases like this where there are kind of multiple charges, but they all kind of fall under murder. But in this case, you have count 1 being murder in the first degree, count 2 being murder in the second degree. Can you talk to us a little bit about why that's the case? Why is it not just the first degree? Why is it both?
So it's a great question. Every state is different, but I'll say that most prosecutors, when they determine what the charges are going to be, they're always going to include multiple charges. They're going to include the top count, which in every jurisdiction is murder in the first degree. They're going to add charges murder in the second degree. Sometimes they'll even add manslaughter, you'll see, in various homicide cases. And part of the reason they do that is it gives them an opportunity to negotiate and potentially get a deal. Often you'll see someone who's charged with the top count who pleads guilty to a lesser in order to get a little less time. So that's one of many reasons. The other reason is sometimes a jury won't agree with the top count and they'll agree with the second tier. And so that's another way for them to get a conviction, not necessarily a top count conviction.
That makes total sense. And Julie, with the preliminary hearing happening kind of towards the end of this month, what do you think we can expect out of it?
So, I always compare everything to New York because in New York, we don't know much. And in some of these other jurisdictions, some of which don't use the grand jury, they use the preliminary hearing as a means to basically let the judge know exactly what the evidence is that the prosecution intends to prove. So I expect we would hear more of the same in terms of his confession, the means of which she was killed, and the beheading as well. I think we're going to hear some ancillary things too, when the police got there, what they saw when they got there, the condition of the victim, the condition of the defendant, where the body was recovered, where the head was recovered. I think we're going to hear many more details than we haven't heard so far.
And are you surprised he was so quick to tell police that he did it? He was the one behind it. Obviously, we still have to say allegedly and all of that stuff. But given what he had already told police admitting to this crime, are you surprised that he did it so fast?
So that's a good question. I think that if I'm assuming that he has a mental disorder, then my answer is no, meaning that he acted in some he acted in a way that was influenced by his mental health issues, such that he wasn't looking or didn't think he'd be able to walk away from this crime. And whether it's a crime of passion or a crime of anger coupled with mental health issues and drug issues, I don't know. But this case, it didn't shock me. But then again, hindsight's 20/20. So if you told me he didn't come forward, I would say, well, it's not shocking that someone who committed such a heinous crime wouldn't have come forward right away.
Right. And at Law&Crime, we see it both ways. We see people who admit it right away. We see people who deny, even for years on end. But I guess we have it kind of both ways here at Law&Crime. But we'll see what happens at this upcoming hearing that's slated to begin later this month. Julie Rendelman, I want to thank you so much and appreciate your time. Before we sign you off, anything else you'd like to add about this case?
No, always great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, always great to have you on. And again, Julie Rendelman, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. Online records show Bowen Fladland's next court hearing is set for July 21st. Thanks for watching us here on Law&Crime. I'm Elizabeth Millner.